Asalaamu alaikum. I'm Avalon, and welcome back to Reborn Muslim, the podcast by and for reverts to Islam. So, on today's episode, I want to talk about breaking up, and not the breaking up that you're thinking of, but breaking up with our vices that have become so commonplace in the Ummah today. So, specifically, what I'm talking about is the content that we're taking in, and just in general, the things that we're taking in, that we're focusing on, and that we're spending our time and resources on. So, one of the reasons that this came up in my mind is how surprised people seem to be when I say that I don't have any streaming services. I don't have Netflix, don't have Hulu, or any of that. I personally stopped using all of the streaming services years ago now. I actually stopped using them even before I became Muslim, so it wasn't all just because of that. But honestly, I just don't have the patience to sit through shows and watch them. So I haven't had Netflix in a long time. And it always surprises me how surprised people are when I say that because it really makes me think that almost everybody has these streaming services or some kind of content, um, and whether it be Netflix, Hulu, music, whatever it might be. And it's really making a negative impact on us. Like, honestly, it's really, really normalizing things that should not be normalized in our Ummah. And, it makes sense for non Muslims to have normalized these things and to be interested in these things because they don't have the moral code that we have in Islam. They don't have the rules and regulations that we have in Islam. But for the Ummah, we got to do better, man. Like, we can't be watching these shows. We can't be engaging in these things. Just using Netflix as an example, the content that they're putting out nowadays is just atrocious. And I know about it because I see posts about the especially, egregious shows that are coming out. Um, just completely normalizing nudity and honestly like pedophilia in some of them, and the LGBT plus movement, just like very much normalizing that and kind of inserting it in every opportunity that they get, um and just normalizing pretty much everything that we should not normalize as Muslims. Like, for example, the show that's so popular nowadays that I constantly hear people talking about is Euphoria. And I've never watched an episode of the show, but from everyone that I hear talking about it, it seems that the entire premise of the show is basically teenagers being in relationships, having sex, doing a lot of drugs, and just like committing crimes or doing things that they're not supposed to. These things that they're normalizing in the show have been normalized for us as well. I think as a Ummah, we really need to take a step back and ask ourselves, just because I hear this all the time and because people talk about it all the time, does that mean it's actually okay? Does it mean that I'm actually okay with this? All of the things that are being normalized in the show, are they actually normal? Should they be normal? And am I okay with them happening? And if not, then why am I constantly bombarding myself with this media portraying these things that I'm not okay with? An example of this is pornography. We obviously know that this is unlawful in Islam and not something we should be engaging in, period. We should have nothing to do with this kind of media. I don't think anybody is arguing on that point. We all know it's wrong. However, somehow we've like rationalized and again normalized watching shows with full nudity. Every time I see a show on Netflix or a movie nowadays or whatever it might be at someone's house or a friend, whatever, there's always a scene with sex and with nudity. We've completely normalized. Like, it's so far past what media used to be. Like, movies back in the day, like in the 50s, like I Love Lucy, um her and her husband didn't even sleep in the same bed in the show. They did because they I guess it was like provocative to even show them going to sleep in the same bed, which is so normal. They would have separate beds next to each other. And so imagine we've gone from that until now, which I'm not saying that's a good thing or bad thing, but imagine how different it was. And now we've normalized just full nudity. And I don't understand how we're seeing that as different than pornography. I know that the intentions are different and there's a whole plot with the show, but when it comes down to it, if you're not okay with watching pornography and seeing nudity there, why are you okay with it on Netflix? Why are you okay with it in movies? It's not okay anywhere. It doesn't matter where you're getting it. We need to stop doing this. We need to stop rationalizing, well, it's a show. I like the show. No, it's not good enough. Like, honestly, that's just not a good enough excuse. And another example of media that we have totally normalized and we had taken so much and it's not good for our hearts as Muslims is music. And a lot of the music nowadays has very explicit lyrics. I don't have to tell you that. I know whoever you are listening to this, you know that. A lot of the music nowadays has lyrics about things that are strictly forbidden for us as Muslims, like sex outside of marriage, like drug use, just generally immoral behavior. This has become totally normalized and hyped up in music and romanticized. It's not even like they're talking about it as their vice, which of course there's songs like that. But by and large, the main theme of these shows or these songs is that these things are good. They romanticize these things and they make it seem like they are things that we should be engaging in and they make you happy and they make your life better. And especially rap is very braggadocious, just, oh, look how much money I have, look how cool I am, look at, I have all these women that are interested in me, I have so many cars, etc. And this is just exactly opposite to what we know about Islam, what we know we should be engaging in Islam, and the behaviors that we should be striving for as Muslims. This is completely opposite. We're supposed to be humble as Muslims, and yet these songs, they're bragging and bringing so much attention to themselves. And we are supposed to refrain from sex outside of marriage as Muslims, and these songs encourage it and encourage having sex with many partners. And I know you could say, well, just because I listen to the music doesn't mean I'm engaging in it myself, right? Like I just like the sound of the music, but I don't actually do these things. But the thing is, the more we engage in this music, the more we listen to this music, the more normalized these behaviors become because we're hearing about it all the time. We're just like, it's just totally normal to us. And I know it seems like, well, I can just control myself. And I'm not saying you can't. I'm definitely not saying that. However, I'm saying you're not doing yourself any favors by listening to this music because we all have weak moments. We all have situations we find ourselves in where we have the choice to commit a sin and it's the easy choice and we want to make that choice. And it's a matter of how much strength you have. However, if you're constantly engaging in this music, constantly listening to it and normalizing these things, then you've already programmed yourself to think it's permissible. Even if your mouth says otherwise, your brain thinks something, your heart thinks something. And so even if you say, no, 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 I don't think it's permissible, when you're constantly ingesting this content, you're going to treat it that way. And when you get in that situation that we all end up these situations, when you end up in that situation where you could choose to sin, it's going to be way easier to because of this programming that you've done. Another example of something that I think the Ummah is spending time on that we need to break up from is excessive spending and just kind of just being very worldly. I don't know how else to say it. Buying many, many pieces of clothing when you already have so many, or buying, always wanting the newest item. It's something that's a disease within society in general. But it's just, again, it's disappointing to see this in the Ummah because I would think that as Muslims, we know better and we know not to engage in these things. But I think a lot of times, in terms of people who are born and raised in Islam, they might take it for granted. And I don't fault them for that because you always take something for granted that you're born and raised into. That's just human nature. However, they might take Islam for granted to the point where they just throw out all Islamic values. And that's why I think I see hijabi influencers, buying an excessive amounts of clothes, spending so much money on clothes, buying designer clothes that I know cost them so much money and just, continually spending this much money, even though that's not representative of our values as Muslims. And I think in reverts, this happens as well because it's kind of this constant cycle. It's like for reverts, they might have lived that way before they came to Islam, which is perfectly understandable if you didn't have a moral code to follow, right? And then they come to Islam and they look around and what do they see? They see these influencers that are doing everything that they did before they came to Islam. So it's kind of like, oh, well, I don't have to change anything. This is fine. And I was exactly the same way when I came to Islam. I looked around and thought, all these things are normal. All the things I used to engage in, Muslims do that too. So I don't have to, what do I have to change? I can just keep living my life the way I am. I'll just put a scarf on my head and I'm a Muslim now and I'll pray sometimes and that's good. And it's not enough. And yet the way influencers have affected us and the content we're consuming, whether it be on social media or other platforms, it really has an effect on us, and it really misrepresents who we're supposed to be as Muslims, because being wasteful and materialistic, again, is very anti-Islam. You should never be wasteful. You should never be focused on this dunya and obsessed with this dunya, obsessed with status, obsessed with the newest trends, and wanting to keep up, wanting to look like everyone else, and wearing the hijab but wearing skin tight clothing so that you can look like everyone else while still, quote unquote, being modest. That's not Islam. Islam is not about loopholes. Islam is not about being of this world. We are in this world, but we don't have to be of this world, and we shouldn't be. And it's just very upsetting and disappointing for me as somebody who's gone through a long journey of first of all, coming to Islam, and then growing in my deen, growing in my faith, becoming closer to Islam and becoming closer to Allah, and then seeing my own Muslims not doing any favors for our ummah in this way, and misguiding new Muslims and born Muslims as well, just misguiding Muslims in general. And I really don't want to sound holier than thou. I don't want to sound like I think I'm perfect and everybody else like, this is something y'all need to work on, but I already got myself straight now. That's not the case at all. And I really don't think that there's anything wrong with watching Netflix on occasion or watching shows on occasion, as long as you're very mindful of what you're watching, and you make sure it's nothing harmful or they're not engaging in forbidden acts for us as Muslims. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I also think that wholesome music is okay in moderation as well. I still listen to like lo-fi music or really chill like jazz. And so I'm not a scholar, as I always say. I'm not a scholar, and I can't speak on the permissibility of all types of music like lo-fi or acoustic. I've heard a variety of opinions. However, one thing I know for sure is that we should not be listening to music that normalizes haram behavior. We shouldn't be. Because if it's taking us away from Allah, if it's talking about haram actions and normalizing them, we shouldn't be listening to it. What I'm trying to say is, I don't want to sound preachy here. I don't want to sound like I think I'm better than anyone, because I don't. Because as I already mentioned, I had a long, long journey. And when I started out, I was doing everything haram. And still, even though I converted to Islam, I was not on the right path. I really wasn't. Astaghfirullah. And it took a long time to get where I am now. But I just don't want us to normalize these things and think that we're doing enough and think that we're good enough as we are. We're never going to be good enough. We're never going to be deserving of the amount of mercy and love that Allah has for us. However, what we can do is try to better ourselves and try to be the best version, and not slack and not fall into this normalization of these actions, and focus on the dunya. We must not lose our focus on the hereafter, and that's become so normal nowadays to seemingly forget about the hereafter and become so obsessed with the dunya, so obsessed with these trends, with buying new clothes, and with buying new cars and a new phone, with watching Netflix, with listening to this music. All of these things go together with distracting us from the main goal, which is the hereafter, and making it to Jannah, inshallah. With that in mind, I think it's important to remember everything is about balance. And the issue is, we are not balanced right now. We're in a state of denial where we're consuming content that is terrible for our hearts, terrible for our deen, and not addressing its effect on us. And just kind of normalizing it and feeling like, well, yeah, I listen to this music, I watch these shows, but it doesn't really change anything for me. I promise you it does. I promise you, if you replace that music and you replace those shows with something more wholesome, and I'm not saying you have to listen to Islamic lectures all day long. I don't do that. And of course, inshallah, we should all be striving for only consuming Islamic content. And, hopefully one day I will too, inshallah. But I don't do that. I can't sit here and tell you, you need to just listen to Quran all day and that's it. I don't do that. So why would I tell you you have to do that? I'm not trying to say that at all. What I'm saying though is replacing it with wholesome content, and as much as possible also Islamic content, so that we're not being distracted from the deen. So the last thing I'll mention before we wrap up that episode is, I guess, kind of my tips on, again, breaking up with these vices, whether it be music or shows, shopping, whatever it is. So for me, the really hard one was music. I was never into shopping much. And I haven't watched Netflix in a really long time, or I haven't had Netflix for a very long time. But really what my vice was music. I loved music. I always have. It to the point where it was like a part of who I was. It was a big part of my identity growing up. and even into, my early 20s. This is just who I was. Um, and so that was very hard for me to let go of. And it was very hard for me to understand that we're not supposed to listen to music as Muslims. And I think something that really changed my mind about it and really made me realize, okay, you know what? I can't keep lying to myself. I can't keep pretending this is okay and this is not having an effect on me. Like, I need to make a change now. One of the things that really helped was I heard the Imam at my masjid. He was talking about, I think he was actually talking about Netflix or like movies, something like that. I don't think he was specifically talking about music, but it was related enough. He was saying how we see this filth in our shows. He called it filth. He's like, there's filth in their shows, and we see it all the time. And, it's just become normalized to where we're all watching it. And he was just kind of talking about it. But I feel like him really referring to it that way as filth, it struck me. And I was like, wow, is the music I'm listening to filth? And when I really examined it, yeah, it is filth. You know what I mean? This is filthy what they're talking about. This is disgusting. And I wouldn't engage in these things. And I wouldn't, I don't want these things to be normalized. So I kind of realized, why am I listening to it? And for me, it wasn't an all or nothing thing. And I don't think we should think of it as an all or nothing thing where it's like, okay, I'm going to give up music today and never listen to it again. I don't think that's plausible for most of us, honestly. It wasn't plausible for me. But what I started doing was really fixating on, what do I want out of this life? What do I want out of the things that I consume? And first of all, thinking about that. Secondly, actively listening to music less, not all at once. So, not just, okay, no music ever again. Just listening less and less and starting to replace it with other things, whatever it may be, podcasts on things that I think are interesting. Again, not all Islamic content, just things that I think are interesting. Some of it might be Islamic podcasts or nasheeds or something, but some of it might just be something as simple as lo-fi music or acoustic, piano music, something like that. Just something more wholesome, again, not distracting me from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not filling my mind with nastiness. So I started slowly, bit by bit, reducing my intake of music while still listening to it, and eventually got to a place at some point where I shifted. I like hit the threshold, I would say, where instead of the norm being listening to music, the norm became not listening to music. And in fact, it became, whenever I was listening to music, I thought, why am I listening to this? I don't even want to listen to it. I would start listening to a song and then I would just want to change it midway because I would think, I'm not even interested in this. Or I'd start listening to whatever, a podcast about something un-Islamic, and I would think, I'm bored of this. Like, I just, like, it's not interesting to me. I don't want to hear this. And it's disgusting and I don't like it anymore. Like, I don't want to listen to this. So this huge change happened, this shift. And it didn't feel huge at the time. It felt like a subtle shift, but really that's when it all changed for me, was when all of a sudden it finally became normal not to listen to music anymore. And so over a course of maybe a few months, it wasn't a super long period of time. I want to say like 2 months it took for me to really stop listening to music. I tell you that story to give you some advice if you are also trying to let go of these vices and work on your deen and grow closer to Allah. So, inshallah, that advice helps you let go of these things and realize that you're going to be okay without it. You can find a replacement. A lot of things, it's not even about the specific content you're consuming, it's just about having something to listen to, if we're being honest, right? So, even if you don't have the exact music you want, over time, if you start replacing it and normalizing more wholesome music and nasheeds, etc., over time, it'll take the place of that old music. And in fact, your heart will feel much better. I promise you, wallahi, you'll feel a lot better and less distracted when you start to let go of these things. So I want to close us today with a quote from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He said, live in this world as if you're a stranger or a traveler. And I think this is something we really need to remember, because right now, I believe that we are living in this world like it's our final stop. Like, this is it. Like, this is where we're meant to be, and there's nothing more. We're getting way too comfortable in this dunya and becoming indistinguishable from non-Muslims, from people who actually don't even believe in an afterlife. We're starting to act like them, but we do believe in an afterlife. We don't believe that this dunya is all that there is. and we need to be living for the afterlife, because this life is just a test. We need to remember these words of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and treat this life as a test, because that's exactly what it is. It's not here forever. It's actually just over in the blink of an eye, and it could happen tomorrow. So we need to think about what we're normalizing, what we're consuming, and again, remember that this life is not forever. So, with that, I'm going to end this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you again very soon, inshallah. Asalaamu alaikum.